Hopefully this is recording. Today I will be discussing human resilience in society and exploring 5 contested perspectives surrounding resilience in modern society. Resilience is often understood as the ability to adapt, recover, and continue functioning during periods of adversity or crisis. Traditionally, resilience was viewed mainly as an individual psychological trait. However, in recent years, resilience has increasingly become a political, social, and cultural concept as well. This presentation examines resilience from both institutional and grassroots perspectives. I will discuss how governments and organizations use resilience as a policy framework, how communities develop resilience independently, and how social structures such as inequality can shape people's ability to survive and recover during difficult circumstances. Ultimately, this presentation asks an important question. Is resilience genuinely empowering? Or can it sometimes shift responsibility away from governments and onto individuals and communities? Resilience as a policy model. Firstly, resilience is increasingly used as a policy model by governments and international organizations. In this context, resilience refers to the ability of societies or systems to absorb crises while continuing to function. Governments often promote resilience during economic crises, public health emergencies, or environmental disasters. Examples of this include the global response to COVID-19 and economic recovery strategies following the 2008 financial crisis. During these periods, governments focused heavily on creating what were sometimes called shock absorbers within society, systems designed to help institutions continue operating during periods of instability. However, critics argue that resilience policies can sometimes become overly top-down in nature. Instead of addressing the root causes of social problems, these policies may simply encourage populations to adapt to hardship without meaningful structural change. Some scholars therefore argue that resilience policies often protect institutions more effectively than they protect citizens themselves. This creates an important tension within resilience discourse. Are societies becoming more resilient, or are individuals simply being expected to tolerate increasing levels of instability? Grassroots resilience movements. In contrast to institutional approaches, resilience can also emerge from grassroots movements and community action. Grassroots resilience refers to communities organizing themselves during periods of stress or crisis, often independently of governments or formal institutions. One major example of this was during the emergence of mutual aid networks during the COVID-19 pandemic. In many communities, ordinary people organized food deliveries, emotional support systems, and assistance for vulnerable neighbors. Another example can be seen in indigenous land defender movements, where resilience is connected not only to survival, but also to cultural identity, environmental protection, and resistance to external pressures. An important insight from grassroots resilience movements is that they often create alternative power structures. Communities develop their own systems of support rather than relying entirely on formal institutions. However, these movements can sometimes clash with official government policies, especially when communities believe institutional responses are insufficient or just outright unjust. This demonstrates that resilience is not always politically neutral. It can also involve resistance, solidarity, and collective action. Global North ideology versus Global South. Another contested perspective is the idea that resilience may reflect a specifically Global North ideology. In many Western societies, resilience is often framed in highly individualistic terms. People are encouraged to become personally adaptable, emotionally strong, and self-reliant. However, critics argue that this perspective may overlook structural inequalities and broader social responsibilities. By focusing heavily on personal resilience, societies may unintentionally shift attention away from issues such as poverty, housing inequality, healthcare access, or labor conditions. In contrast, many non-Western cultures place greater emphasis on collective resilience, community interdependence, and spiritual traditions connected to survival and well-being. This raises important questions about whether dominant understandings of resilience are culturally universal, or whether they primarily reflect Western social and economic values. Is there a cross-cultural common ground? Despite cultural differences, there are also important common themes in how societies understand resilience. Across many cultures, resilience is linked to adaptation, survival, and collective memory. Communities often draw strength from shared historical experiences and traditions that help them endure hardship. However, different societies may prioritize resilience differently. Some cultures focus more heavily on individual responsibility and independence, while others emphasize collective support networks and communal well-being. Similarly, some approaches to resilience focus primarily on material conditions, such as economic security, while others place stronger importance on spiritual or cultural dimensions of resilience. Understanding these differences is important because it reminds us that resilience is not a single universal concept. It is shaped by history, culture, politics, and social values. Social structures shape survival. One of the most important factors influencing resilience is social structure. Research consistently shows that wealth inequality can create significant resilience gaps within societies. Individuals and communities with greater financial security generally have better access to healthcare, education, stable housing, and psychological support systems. Community design also plays a major role. High-trust societies with strong social bonds often recover more quickly from crises and disasters than fragmented or isolated communities. In other words, resilience is not simply about personal mindset or emotional strength. Social conditions can significantly influence a person's ability to cope with adversity. This challenges the idea that resilience is entirely an individual responsibility. Instead, resilience must also be understood as something shaped by public policy, social investment, and community relationships. Tensions in defining resilience. As we can see, there are many tensions involved in defining resilience. On one hand, resilience can be empowering. It can help individuals and communities survive difficult circumstances and adapt to adversity. On the other hand, resilience discourse can sometimes become problematic if it normalizes hardship or shifts responsibility away from institutions. For example, encouraging people to become more resilient may be helpful, but it should not replace efforts to address the social conditions causing hardship in the first place. This is why resilience remains such a contested concept within sociology, psychology, and political discourse. Is resilience liberation or coercion? This leads to the central question of the presentation. Is resilience a form of liberation or can it become a form of coercion? For some people, resilience represents empowerment, survival, and community solidarity. For others, resilience discourse can become a distraction from social justice issues by encouraging people to endure difficult conditions rather than demanding systemic change. In reality, the answer may depend on context. Resilience can be both a necessary survival strategy and a concept that risks normalizing inequality if broader structural problems are ignored. In conclusion, resilience is far more complex than simply bouncing back from adversity. Resilient discourse reveals important assumptions about who societies consider worthy of protection, support, and survival. While resilience can empower individuals and communities, it can also expose inequalities within social systems and public policy. Ultimately, resilience should not only involve helping people endure hardship, it should also involve creating fairer social structures that reduce unnecessary suffering and provide equal opportunities for individuals and communities to thrive. Thank you for listening. Goodbye. Oh, this is Ashley Denningham, 227-43685. I think it was. Well, let me get that again. Sorry. 227-43685. Ashley Denningham. Yeah, sorry.